and behaviors for students and their families. So if you were able to grab a folder when you came in, inside you'll find some additional information about our coalition, including our MVP, Most Valuable Person campaign, youth mental health first aid training information, and just a couple other handouts in there. We've also included Dr. Rich's digital wellness lab website information in your folder, so you can access that at home. Their website is always up to date as well. So tonight's presentation is also being recorded by volunteers from Wilbraham Public Access, so we just wanted to give a huge thank you to them for that, and the video will be available after the event if you'd like to go back and watch it or share it with anyone who wasn't able to attend tonight. If you did not receive a folder and you would like one, please come see me after the event, or you can always send me an email and I can send you over everything that was in the packet. After tonight's presentation, we would greatly appreciate it if you would be so kind as to fill out the evaluation form that's in the folder. You could either fill it out with a hard copy, or there's a QR code on there if you want to fill it out electronically as well. We'd really appreciate your feedback. And then lastly, at the end of the night, we'll be doing a raffle for some Big Y and Rice's gift cards if you'd like to stick around for those. So, without further ado, let me introduce Dr. Rich to you. So Dr. Rich came to medicine after a 12-year career as a filmmaker. His experience and expertise in medicine and media synergize in his health research and clinical work. Dr. Rich earned his bachelor's degree in English and film from Pomona College, his medical degree from Harvard Medical School, and his master's in public health from the Harvard T.H. Chan School of Public Health. Dr. Rich is currently an Associate Professor of Pediatrics at Harvard Medical and practices Adolescent Medicine at Boston Children's Hospital. Dr. Rich is also the founding director of the first evidence-based medical program addressing physical, mental, and social health issues associated with digital technology, the Clinic for Interactive Media and Internet Disorders. As the Mediatrician, Dr. Rich offers research-based, balanced, and practical answers to parents, teachers, and clinicians' questions about children's media use and the positive and negative implications for their health and development. Understanding the power of screens to engage, connect, and change us all, he is bringing together pediatricians and software engineers, educators and designers, psychologists, and screenwriters in the Digital Wellness Lab to synergize in researching, responding to, and innovating a digital environment in which we can raise healthy, smart, productive, and kind children. So, without further ado, I will hand it over to Dr. Michael Rich.
Thank you. Thanks for coming, everybody. I'm glad this is working because I like to be able to move around. I will get through, or maybe I won't. So thank you for those of you who sent in questions. I have 2 full pages in 10 or 9 font, single-spaced of your questions. So I hope I can answer maybe a quarter of them. But I will stay after as long as you need me to answer all your questions. But I did go through them and try to bring answers to a lot of those questions in this talk. We all know the headlines. They're pretty panicky, they're pretty awful, and I'm here to tell you it's not as bad as you think. The kids are all right, but we have to hear from them what's working and what's not working for them. They are growing up in a very different world than any of us grew up in. They're really in a screen-saturated world. Think about it. You know, there's virtually no built environment, no building where there isn't a screen, at least one in every room. We have them in our pockets, we have them on our wrists. They're around them all the time. It is a very different environment than the days of television. The average amount of time that kids are actively using screens every day is 8.5 hours, and sometimes that's using more than one screen simultaneously. 50% of teenagers say that they're online essentially all the time, including at night. How many, and there are kids here, how many kids have a cell phone in your bedroom at night? Oh, come on. I don't believe that for a second. How many use a cell phone as their alarm to wake up in the morning? Okay, there's a dad. There's a courageous person in the back. There you go. Anyway, lots of kids have them in their rooms. It's okay. I'm not going to out you. What we have is not the new normal, but what I'm calling the next normal. And that's because this is constantly evolving. We're following three moving targets, one being the development of a human from infancy through childhood, adolescence, to adulthood. The second is a rapidly evolving digital environment, which is both affecting that development and reflecting it, because these kids are making media all the time. This is no longer a reception-only environment. This is a dialogue going on between the kids and their smartphones and the world. And it's constantly changing, but it allows them to be connected to anyone, anywhere, at any time. And one of the concerns we have, and we'll talk about this a little more later, is that with this near infinite connectivity, are we actually losing our deep and sustaining connectedness with each other? Are these phones actually coming between us? How many times have you seen kids lined up, all with their phones, right beside each other? I've asked them sometimes, who are you texting? Him. Like, what? Right? We use these phones to step back from our closeness with each other and step back from that intimacy that is a little embarrassing, a little awkward, a little weird, but we lose something in the process. 17% increase in screen media use during the pandemic, and that's just what they confessed to. That is not counting school, because many kids went to remote school. And what we found is almost 50% of parents said that during the pandemic, when there's lots of screens on, the level, the frequency, and the severity of the arguments with their kids about screen time increased. We have to see this really as a digital ecosystem, as not just screens as vectors of harm or help, if in case of education, but really as part of our environment. It's essentially like the air we breathe. We're using it all the time, back and forth, just like breathing. And 94% of teens report that they own a smartphone. 84% check it at least hourly. The weirdest thing is 46% check it every 5 minutes. They are afflicted, as many of us are, with FOMO. You all know what FOMO is, fear of missing out, but with teenagers in particular, there's another layer that's really important to them, perhaps even more important than FOMO, and that's what we're calling faux blow, but fear of being left out. Fear that the chatter that's going on will go away, if they disappear from it, something will happen that they won't know about tomorrow. And a lot of them keep their phones nearby through the night for that very reason. So they're engaged in really a constant dialogue with with all their friends, both IRL, in real life, and online. And 40% say they enjoy online and in-person interactions equally. There is good to be online, and many kids have friends that they only have online, that they've never met in person. 54% of teens say it would be hard to give up their social media. And so I think that instead of thinking about an online world and an offline world, the real world, the virtual world, these kids live in one world, and they move seamlessly back and forth between these worlds. There's no real distinction, and that's kind of old thinking, to think there's a distinction. And that's one of the good things is that these kids figured out how to work in this digital environment. So 64% of parents reported that their kids' time online the summer after lockdown. Remember that summer where there was a brief moment we thought everything was over and then Omicron hit? We all said, oh, we're all going to go outside. We're all going to, have a great time, except the kids' media use kept going up, even when the weather was nice. 80% of teens say they communicate mostly or only with people they know in real life. So all the fears that we're going to be meeting strangers who are going to be grooming us and be harmful to the kids is really not happening except in very rare events. So let's think a little bit about why these screens are so attractive. I mean, how many times have I had parents say to me, why is my kid staring at that damn phone all the time? And one of the things that's really interesting is that this interactive media environment that we've created is actually a very fertile environment for some key tasks of adolescent development. The first being experience. They're seeking experience. They're writing on the blank slate of their knowledge, of their experience, by extending what they can experience by traveling around the world on the phone. Traveling to meet people, to see things, etc., that they couldn't otherwise. They also seek independence from their parents, from teachers, from authority figures. They are seeking autonomy. They are beginning to have the social consciousness. They're moving out of their nuclear families, out of this sort of self-centered life, and really thinking about a bigger world. Many of it through a lens of social justice. This is when animal rights activists or climate change and all of this, and they get really activated. And the online space is a great place to connect with people who think the way you do, who can work together. It's and a lot of kids have created really interesting activism online. They are figuring out who they are. They're seeking their identity. They're looking at, celebrities, they're looking at other friends, they're looking at their parents, they're looking at all other role models in their community, and they're figuring out what they want to be like and what they don't want to be like. And as they figure out that identity, they're reaching out for connection as individuals to the world. And so if you think about it, these incredibly powerful tools that we now have in our pockets are great tools for doing all of these things as long as it's done in a mindful, thoughtful, directed way. So, you're going to get a little brain science. There will be a quiz afterwards. No. But one of the things that we also have to remember about why they're so attached to their phones and why they sometimes don't make the right decisions with what they do on their phones is the way the human brain develops. Now, this is an animation of the brain where the least mature areas are red, the most mature areas are blue, and as you'll see, it matures back to front. The back of the head, the back of the brain is our visual cortex. Kids are incredibly good at seeing things. The front of the brain is the prefrontal cortex, which is where executive function happens. Things like impulse control, future thinking, what we would call judgment, even what we would call the conscience. And so one of the interesting things is, who figured out this business of the executive functions happening last was not the neuroscientists. It was the car rental companies. Think about when you can rent a car. Age 25. And that's because that's where the actuarial tables cross between the risk they're taking, giving you their car, and what the money they might make from your rental. And actually, if you think about it, the most dangerous time, actually the time you pay the most in insurance for cars, is that 16 to 25 age group. And what we now know is that the prefrontal cortex doesn't finish fully maturing until the mid to late 20s. Stuck. I can do this. There we go. So one of the questions is, can there be such a thing as too much media time? You know, is there a point at which what's okay becomes toxic in some way? So one of the things that we do is we do surveys across the country that are representative of the nation, and we look at how kids use media. Now, when we talked earlier about using 2 or more screens at a time, there are kids who actually have a cumulative amount, on average, a cumulative amount of exposure of almost 12 hours a day. That's the average, because they are looking at 2 screens for some of that time. And so we took these national data and said, let's divide them into thirds. Let's divide them into the kids who have, the third of kids who had the least amount of exposure, the kids who had moderate, and the kids who had heavy exposure, and let's compare them. So one interesting thing is where the break was. The lowest third was up to 3 hours a day of exposure. The heavy users were 16 hours or more a day of total exposure. You know, these are the kids who are watching a movie and writing their English paper and texting their friend and have music or have a movie going on in the background. And we asked them 3 questions. We said, what are your grades? Are they A's and B's? Or are they C's and below? Do you get in trouble a lot? And how contented are you? And the interesting thing was the kids with the least amount of exposure had about half the negative outcomes the kids with the most exposure had. Now, I'll be the first to tell you that this is not necessarily causal. It may be contributory, but there are a lot of factors that go into it. So if you think about it, a kid who is not very contented with life may be more likely to be online than be hanging out with his or her friends. And then they don't get any practice at making friends and keeping friends, and therefore they spend more time on screen. So there seems to be a cyclical or a bidirectional relationship between these things. And we asked kids in one of our national surveys, we asked them, do you think using multiple devices helps or hurts you? One of the interesting things was, look at this, 55% said it affects how well they pay attention. Let's talk a little bit about what we call media multitasking. I got a little secret for you. It's a myth. The human brain is incapable of thinking more than one thing at a time. What we are doing when we have multiple screens open, or when we are, watching the television news while making dinner, any kind of multitasking, is we're actually rapid switch tasking. We're moving from one thing to the other to the other. And so one of the ways that we sort of explored this is with college students from Stanford and MIT, who you could argue are pretty smart, all of whom were convinced they were really good at multitasking. And we had them do a bunch of experiments. One is doing their homework with nothing going on, doing their homework with music on, doing their homework with another screen open to a movie or something that's sort of running, being on with someone else, texting back and forth while they're doing homework. And here's the interesting thing. When compared to just monotasking or just doing their homework, they took longer, almost twice as long to do their homework. They had 50% more mistakes in their homework, and they retained 20% of the information that they had covered. Because what they were doing is skating over the surface of these things. And when you really, if you think about it, when you're doing a math problem, when you are writing a paper on Hamlet, when you are, trying to figure out photosynthesis, you need to do more than just pass your eyes over that information. You need to incorporate it. You need to reflect on it. You need to really incorporate it in your mind. And that doesn't happen when you are multitasking. They also found that it affected their productivity. Some of them thought their brain didn't work as well afterwards. And they didn't feel that they could do multiple things at once as well as they thought they could. And then came the pandemic. And what we saw was not that new problems arose, but that the pandemic, the lockdown, and all of us being stuck in our houses, with our family, served as kind of an accelerant, like throwing gas on a fire. It served as an amplifier of the problems. And there was some good news, interestingly. What we found was that when schools went to remote schooling, that in fact, there were more positive results than negative ones in terms of learning didactic stuff, reading, math, science, etc. What really suffered were their social skills. And if you think about it, how rough this is, what we're seeing now is a huge surge particularly in adolescent mental health issues. Because if you think about it, here you are, a teenager, everything in your biology says, get with my friends, get the hell away, from my parents. And they're saying, we're going to lock you in a box with your parents for a year, right? It was hard on them. It was really hard on them. And we saw anxiety, depression, anger, lots of sort of acting out that has come of it. And we're still reaping the results of that. It's got a long tail in terms of its effects. And one of the interesting things we found is that these kids would get exhausted 6 hours in front of a screen all day. And what did they do when school was over? They stayed in front of the screen and they played Fortnite or Minecraft or Roblox. And people go, oh my God, Fortnite is awful. They're busy shooting each other. When I talked to the kids about it, the kids didn't talk about it as a game. They didn't talk about it as if they were winning or losing. They talked about it as hanging out with their friends. It was the equivalent of the basketball court or the city park or sandlot baseball. It was just a place to be with their friends. And yeah, they swore a lot. And they were playing with their friends. A lot of parents came back and said, I didn't even know we knew those words. But it was their way of coming together, of being together. And in fact, one of the things that we found is that the single highest rate of communicating with their friends was not social media. It was not even texting. It was talking on their headphones while they were gaming. That was the most kids were interacting on their headphones in the games. Now, what causes the negative effects that everybody's so worried about, that we are also worried about? And what we found, both from the kids we've treated, the clinical experience, and from our research, it is not about a specific type device or activity. It is not the smartphone doing something to us or social media doing something to us. It's what we do with it. And what engages the kids and keeps them engaged is not good software, it's not the device, it's the interactivity. It's the fact that they can have a back and forth in a game sense that's designed in. It's a variable reward system, very similar to what happens in a casino. And that's how the games keep the kids hooked in. But when you go into social media, the variable reward system is human nature. You post something and then you wait and see, how many likes do I get? Ooh, am I going to get trolled? And worst of all, is no one going to notice? Am I not going to get any views at all? And so what happens is you get immersed in this interactivity and you lose track of time and place. And these kids will play literally for 6 or 8 or 10 hours easily without knowing. And those are the kids that end up coming to our clinic. Some of these kids will stay up all night gaming. Some of the kids will go to bed when their parents tell them to go to bed, and then their parents fall asleep and they wake up and they stay up all night gaming, because these massively multi-user online games are happening 24/7. And there are many kids who have their groups that they play with who are in China and in Indonesia and in Africa. And they are up in the middle of their day, and our kids are up in the middle of their night. So what happens if we turn off all the screens? Well, this was a study we did actually about 10 years ago now, in which we asked 1,000 college students in 10 countries, 5 different continents, and said, we want you to turn all of your electronics off for 24 hours. OMG. I literally did not know what to do with myself in the UK. I didn't use my cell phone all night. It was horrible from Chile. I felt lonely as if I was in a small cage on an island from China. We had true globalization of this experience, that they were lost without their devices. Media is my drug. Without it, I was lost. I am an addict. And from the good old US of A, I was itching like a crackhead because I couldn't use my phone. So the question is, can you be addicted? This is a study we did actually in Canada, in Alberta, Canada. It's part of a large global study called Growing Up Digital. And we asked parents and grandparents of kids whether their kids were addicted to their devices. Interestingly, 30% of the parents said they themselves were addicted, but only 22% of them thought their kids were. When we asked the grandparents, 36% said, yeah, they both are. They're both addicted. So the question is this addiction? And let's think about what addiction is. For one thing, just so you know, the word addiction is not used in medicine at all. It's called substance use disorder. Addiction is actually a colloquial term that is used. But let's think about how we kind of conceptualize addiction. It's use of a pleasurable but unnecessary substance for life. You know, whether that's nicotine, whether that's cocaine, whether that's heroin, whether that's alcohol. There are physiologic changes when they are using, and especially when they are withdrawing from that use, that are measurable and reproducible person to person. There's continued use despite negative consequences. You know, people's relationships fall apart, they lose jobs, etc. And the treatment is abstinence, right? You stop drinking alcohol, you stop using opioids, etc. Now, what's going on with the devices? It's overuse of, in fact, now a necessary resource. These kids need to be able to use interactive media to study in school, to get jobs in the future, to communicate. We have shifted into an environment where these tools are absolutely necessary. These behaviors are driven by psychological disorders. What we have found in every case of a kid who has kind of gone down the rabbit hole in terms of gaming or social media is that they have an underlying psychological issue like ADHD, like anxiety, that they are actually soothing by their behavior. Think about it. If you have ADHD, you have a hard time paying attention, you spend your whole day in school, and you feel like you're not getting it, you're not hearing it, you feel like, oh my God, everybody's in it. It happens in social situations too. They have the conversations with someone and they can't keep up. And then they go home and they sit down in front of the screen and they play Call of Duty, and they are good. They are wicked awesome at it. And that's because in that environment, distractibility is actually a strength. And in fact, one of the things that we understand now about ADHD is that it is probably a normal variant. It is not an abnormality of the brain. It is a normal variant because if you think about it, back in the days when we were hunter-gatherers and we crawled out of the cave in the morning and sought our meal and not to become someone else's meal, that distractibility, that hypervigilance really, really helped our ancestors survive so that we would be here. So you take that consummate hunter-gatherer, you sit him down in a classroom and say, sit down, shut up, and listen to that person droning in front of that classroom. It doesn't work. And so one of the things that we are realizing is that these kids seek out these environments because they feel masterful, they feel good, they feel in control, something they don't feel during the day. Same thing with anxiety. Kids who are anxious, particularly social anxiety, go to social media because they feel it's safer. It's a safer way to sort of exceed how people interact and to tell people how they feel without being vulnerable. And what they see there is that everybody is happier than they are, is more fulfilled than they are, is richer than they are, is prettier than they are. You fill in the blanks because we only post the best of ourselves. We don't post what we really feel deep down inside. But when you come to it and you see other people's stuff, you know how you feel deep down inside and you feel less than. And so in fact, what we found is that kids who go to it with anxiety actually get increasingly anxious and depressed from looking at it. Like substance use disorder, there is continued use despite negative consequences. But the goal of therapy in this case is self-regulation. They need to be able to use these tools in effective, focused, mindful ways, not stop using them altogether. And so what we are seeing is that this is more akin to binge eating disorder, where people are eating not because they're hungry, not because their body needs it, but to fulfill a need, a psychological need within. We're calling this condition problematic interactive media use, PIMU, for very specific reasons. The first is, we've already talked about why we don't call it addiction, because it doesn't match what happens in addiction. But here's the other thing about the word addiction. There's a stigma to it. We as a society think of addiction and addicts as, weakness of character and terrible, these are persons who are less than in some way, and often we approach it as something to be punished rather than something to be treated. And so what happens is that parents see their kid who is going online, who is gaming or whatever, as a problem, a behavior problem, not as something that can actually be intervened on. And so they don't come to care until things are really bad, until they look for all the world like a junkie, right? And so one of the things that we're seeing is that it is affecting a lot of aspects of life, from their sleep, for obvious reasons, because of the phones at night, staring into the blue light that suppresses melatonin into the wee hours, and also actually leaving it on vibrate, leaving it so they can actually answer it. And we did some research that found that 29% of teenagers said they would wake up at night to respond to a text. That's almost a third. It affects their academic performance because they will often go online instead of doing homework. It affects their social life and their relationships. A lot of them withdraw. They have, they crawl back into their room and they get in front of the screen and they don't hang out with their friends. They don't hang out with their family. And so we're seeing a fair amount of mental health issues around this. And how does it present itself? One is in gaming. Gaming sort of over and above everything. One is social media, using social media as a primary way to connect with each other, but not using it as a bridge to develop relationships more. Okay. It got stuck. Maybe it was the morality police that stuck it. Kids are going to pornography. I hate to say it, but the average age now of first coming on pornography online is 9. Okay? And because we have a real crazy quilt of sex education in our country, for a lot of kids, this is their sex education. And there's a problem there because pornography is not real. Pornography is fiction. And we are seeing a fair number of young adults now who are really messed up in terms of their sexual development, their gender identities, all kinds of stuff, because all they've done is seen pornography. They haven't pushed past that fear of intimacy to try to develop relationships. And what we're calling information binging. This is the endless Reddit, Quora, YouTube, Wikipedia. I had a kid who came to me and said, I'm addicted to Wikipedia. He would literally sit down and follow every hot link for hours.
Waiting list. Unfortunately, too long.
This is Dr. Michael Rich, Director of the Clinic for Interactive Media and Internet Disorders at Boston Children's Hospital, who wants these parents to know their kids may have an underlying vulnerability.
Other things that they come to games with, like attention deficit hyperactivity disorder. It's huge in the kids who have gaming issues. We have yet to see a young person who does not also have a condition such as anxiety, mood disorders, are driving these behaviors.
And he encourages parents and all of us not to use the word addiction.
while it looks and feels to your mom like an addiction, it's not actually an addiction so much as it's, you know, it's sort of behavioral manipulation.
This is the mother of 13-year-old Leo, and she's asking about her son's love of Fortnite.
This game was just, the draw to it was unbelievable.
Dr. Rich tells them a lot of kids feel that way.
They make their money not only by getting you to play, but keeping you playing. And it's very carefully designed to do that.
Dr. Rich also tells parents to sit down with their kids, go through the techniques, and demystify the game.
I say, sit down next to your son and play the game with him and help him understand what is happening. They will really recognize how they are being manipulated.
So this is the part that parents always freak out about, which is I say, instead of yelling at your kid and say, I hate Grand Theft Auto, I don't like the fact that you're practicing stealing cars and shooting cops, sit down next to your kid and play the game with him or her. Do not have any hope of winning. There is no chance. Not only do your thumbs not move that fast, but the 47 different sequences you need to do to actually steal a car, you finally figure it out, and then you turn to your child and you say, I finally figured out how to steal a car. Let's talk a little bit about why you might want to practice that over and over and over again. You are coming from a very different place. You're not wagging a finger at them and saying, that's terrible. You're saying, I love you, I respect you, I want to see what engages you here and understand it, but I also want to bring in some of my executive function, and let's think a little bit about what you're learning and rehearsing over and over again. And the kids actually will respond to that, you know, because you're coming as their student in a sense. You're changing the power differential, and you're coming to them and saying, let's think this through together. So what happened when we went back to the kids, those 1,000 college students that we tortured for 24 hours? What was really interesting, 2 weeks later, it was unpleasant to realize I'm in a constant state of distraction. When you really get off the media, you realize how many quality things you can do. I interacted with my parents more than usual, imagine. And I love this. I've lived with my best friends for 3 years. This is one of the best days we spent together. One of the things that we're actually recommending, not just to kids who are struggling with problematic interactive media use, but actually to kids we give primary care to, is to consider taking some time with everything off. I have a colleague who for 12 years with her family has taken a digital Sabbath every week, 24 hours with everything off. And interestingly, most people look at me like I'm completely crazy when I recommend it. I'll fess up to that. But the people who are most likely to try it, interestingly, are people who are in tech or entertainment, because they know what the back end of it is. They know what's going on behind. And they come back and they say, OMG, that was the hardest 24 hours I ever spent with my family. The second time we did it, it was liberating, because we weren't being bothered all the time. We weren't being pulled away all the time. So we went for walks. We went in the backyard and we tossed a ball around. I had a mom say, we went for a walk and my husband held my hand for the first time in 20 years. You know, I mean, the little things come back. And if you think about it, the concept of a Sabbath or a Shabbat is so integral to virtually every culture on the face of the earth, to take some time where you let the worldly cares go away and you get back in touch with what's within and around you. This thing is so finicky. So the Digital Wellness Lab at Boston Children's Hospital is set up to really understand how we are affected by the media we use and how we use them. It is not just the content of the media, it is the context in which we use them. So texting is perfectly fine, but you don't do it at the dinner table or in the middle of the night, right? You think about where you're doing it, who you're doing it with. And we're also seeking ways to incorporate these powerful tools in our lives in ways that empower us to be physically, mentally, and socially well, both as individuals and as a society. And so the lab has, a lot of services that I would urge you to take advantage of. We have the Family Digital Wellness Guide follows the arc of a child's development from infancy right through to young adulthood, and looks at how screens interface with various stages in positive as well as negative ways. And we have a lot of resources on YouTube and other places where kids are. But what we're seeking here is digital wellness, which is the intentional state of physical, mental, and social health that occurs with mindful engagement in the digital and natural environment. You notice we use the word environment as a singular because the digital and natural environment is a single environment. It is not two separate ones. So how do we get to wellness? Well, we have a 5 M's way of remembering it. One is we model. Kids hear about 1% of what we say and 100% of what we do. So if we are staring at our smartphone with that all-important email from the boss and saying, turn off the video game and come to dinner, to kids that's the height of hypocrisy. So we need to be the change we want to see in our kids. And you know what? That email will still be there tomorrow morning when the office opens. And when you try it, it's wonderful. You know what I love? I love losing my phone. Because I'm sitting there saying, I'm not so focused on it that I remember where I put it down. So we really need to model for our kids the way we want them to behave and, frankly, spend time with them, be with them. The second one is to mentor them. Not just teach them, but if you think about it, a mentorship relationship has learning that happens both ways. And so this is the sitting down next to them and playing the video game with them. Learning from their incredible technological facility, learning things about how to make games work, but also how to make the internet work, they'll teach you things. But also that gives you the opportunity to help them incorporate these activities into their lives in ways that help them be the person that you hope they will become. Smart and interactive and productive and kind to other kids. The other one, the next one is to monitor them. This is one that is really, really hard for kids and parents, but if you think about it, a 13-year-old, which is theoretically old enough to go on social media by the law, which frankly has nothing to do with human development. It was a negotiated age that was actually based on PG-13 movies. But to a 13-year-old, privacy means so mom and dad can't see. They're not even conscious of the millions of other people out there who are seeking to get pictures of them, et cetera, et cetera. So one of the things that I tell the kids in my practice, I say, you've got to observe the grandma rule. And that is, you don't put anything online you don't want grandma to see, because she can. Grandma is much different than mom or dad. Mom or dad is somebody you sort of push against, you sort of try to push the limits, you try to get away with stuff. But grandma is somebody who loves you unconditionally and you want to have her respect. And the reason I use the grandma rule is I tell them, anything you post online goes far, it goes fast, and it's sticky. It's going to be somewhere when you apply for college, when you apply for a job. It is going to be somewhere on some hard drive and someone will discover it. So, unfortunately, 13-year-olds are a long time from that 25 to late 20s full executive functions. One of the things that we recommend, and this is the part where the big intake of breath is going to happen with all the kids, is that first of all, they get these devices, these social media accounts, anything when they need it. Think of it as a power tool. It is an incredibly powerful tool. The smartphone in your pockets is over 1 million times more powerful than the computer that landed people on the moon. Think about that. And we're walking around with that in our pockets. Okay? Would we, if our 4-year-old threw a tantrum, hand them the keys to the car and say, calm down, have at it, or give them a chainsaw? we give them a smartphone. So when the child asks for a smartphone, the question you want to ask them is, why do you want one? And virtually always, the first thing out of their mouths is because everyone else has one. Think about that smartphone. There is about 99.9% of what's on there is entertainment, is distraction. It is not helping them move forward. When they figure out that what they need to answer to you is, here's how I'm going to use it as a tool, then you sit down with them and you say, okay, here's how you're going to use it. Here is explicitly how you're not going to use it. And you have to be explicit that they can see essentially anything on that phone. And so they need to be aware of what they're going to see. And you do it in a way that allows them to feel safe coming to you when they see something that confuses them, scares them, weirds them out in some way. You are there to mentor them, to take care of them in that environment, not to bust them. Okay, so we try to move parenting from policing to supporting success. And then before they get that phone or whatever, the third thing you decide is, should you misstep, and you will misstep, because we all do, what should the consequences be? That's when the kid will say, well, I should lose the phone for a week, right? Because they still don't have it. Once they have it, they're not going to volunteer that. So remember, what you do with it, what you don't do with it, and what should happen if you misstep. Here's the other thing, the other M, another M, and that is to make memories. I don't remember a thing I did as a kid in front of a television. What I do remember is the hikes I went on with my family, the fights I had with my family, the vacations we went on, the times we were real with each other. I don't think we make memories when we're online. Think about how we lose track of time and place when we're there. So let's put aside the devices. And here's one of the questions that always is asked is, what is a screen time limit? And how much time is too much? The concept of screen time limits is obsolete. I study this stuff and I couldn't possibly tell you how much screen time I had yesterday or today, because we move in and out of screen environments so fluidly. We don't sit down and watch a television show the way we used to, so we can't really measure it. And frankly, there is no research that shows that there's a point where it's okay, and then it gets bad. Because it is not that we're using a screen, it's what we're not doing because we're on a screen. We're not sleeping, we're not doing our homework, we're not hanging out with our family, we're not doing something else. And that, what we ultimately owe our kids is a rich and diverse a rich and diverse menu of experience. And that can include screens, but isn't the only thing. It's not a default position. And finally, when we have these 4 M's, we achieve a kind of mastery. We master this environment. And one of the arguments I have all the time, I work with a lot of the big tech companies, advising them on how to build a better mousetrap, if you will. They talk about internet safety all the time, and I say, you've got to stop talking about internet safety. They go, what? But we're the good guys. We're trying to protect the kids. I said, the moment you start talking about internet safety, you mean we should enter this space on the defense, back on our heels, instead of saying, this is a tool that we control. This is a tool that we can make do what we want it to do. We can build the kind of society online we want to live in. We're not victims. Let's not be victims. Let's not just be survivors. Let's be thrivers in this environment. And let's use it well. And so there's no kid who really wants to be on defense all the time. They want to explore. They want to learn. They want to do things. And the other thing that I argue with the tech companies about is they're constantly talking about parental controls. Right? There's no kid on the face of this earth that wants to be controlled by their parents. And There's no parent on the face of this earth that wants to spend all their time controlling their kids and seeing how many hours or how many minutes or what they did. We've got to talk about parental engagement and build into these devices ways that parents can share this space with their kids without guilt and shame, but with understanding that this is yet another environment that they have to learn to negotiate, just like when they go to another kid's party or they go to a football game, etc. So those are our 5 M's: model, mentor, monitor, make memories, and achieve mastery. And so finally, some concrete recommendations. Use media with your kids, as we talked about with the gaming. Learn from them and teach them. Share the knowledge, because there's a lot that they know that we don't. And there's a lot that we know that they don't. Teach these devices as tools, as power tools, not as treats to be given for straight A's or taken away for beating up their sister. These are tools that they should learn the way they learn to use a power saw or they learn to drive a car. And when we teach a kid to drive a car, we don't say, don't hit that tree, don't run over people. We teach them to drive, and in the process, they learn not to hit the tree and run over people. So let's not approach learning this as something to be feared, but as something to be mastered with responsibility and with respect for oneself and others. In other words, respect for oneself is the grandma rule. Don't put anything out there that you don't want out there when you apply to college. Although they're not thinking about applying to college, believe me. They can't think past lunch, but they're going to apply to college, and they're going to, as many of us I'm sure did, say, I was so stupid then. Help them to develop critical thinking. There used to be an old statement online, garbage in, garbage out. Well, there is no quality control for what's online. We have to help kids really understand how to figure out what's the truth and what's not. We're in the age of misinformation and disinformation. We're in the age of social media creating algorithms that put you in an echo chamber where you hear nothing but what you already believe. We have to keep people thinking about injecting some cognitive dissonance in their lives, right? That all health does not mean eating less, does not mean getting an eating disorder. Health is a balanced life. And so there are many, many problems that occur from kids sort of going down a rabbit hole of a belief system built by these algorithms on social media. Prioritize and manage day with the child, with the kid. Instead of having screen time limits, how about non-screen minimums? How about, forget screen time limits, let's think about non-screen minimums, times when you're out shooting hoops at the basketball or you're hanging out with your friends or whatever. That is easier to measure than screen time is. And it's harder to cheat on, but one of the ways I think about it is, think about your 24-hour day as an empty glass that you fill up with this many hours of sleep. Remember, teenagers need more sleep than they did a few years earlier because they're in the second most rapid growth spurt in their life. That's why they sleep all weekend, but they also try to stay up all night. And so I think that we have to be conscious of the fact that that 24 hours is finite. You have this much sleep, you have this much time in school, you want to play some strenuous physical exercise, put that in there. There's homework time, a sit-down family meal once a day, single most protective thing you can do, not just for their nutrition, but for their mental health. A time when you sit down, you break bread, and you say, so what happened? What happened in school today? What did you learn? And usually it's nothing. But once you start getting in the habit of it, you'll start to hear the complaints about the algebra teacher, the cool thing that happened on the field today, whatever. And you develop a habit of exchanging and depressurizing from the day. And that's one of the wonderful things about family. And finally, consciously create online. We are all creating online anyway, but do it consciously. Every Snapchat, Every Insta, every thing we post or video we post, every TikTok we make is a creation. So let's do it thoughtfully, let's do it mindfully, and let's realize that it reflects who we are and what we believe, what we think. And do it in a way that is conscious rather than just, isn't this cool? So, to wrap up, instead of developing killer apps, what we should be developing is our killer bees. What are the killer bees? There are 3. Be balanced in our screen and non-screen time, and our screen activities and our non-screen activities. Be mindful in our screen activities when we create, when we respond, when we access something online. And perhaps most importantly for all of us, but particularly for parents, be present. Don't be staring at your smartphone when your kid comes home in kind of a droopy mood. You don't even notice it. When we talk to the kids, we found that one of the things that I do actually, when I'm in the exam room with the patient and the parents are out of the room, as I say somewhat subversively, what can your parents do better? And almost always the first thing out of their mouth is, pay more attention to me. And these are parents who say, our kid never talks. Our kids are like, oh, all the time. So you develop this culture around not paying attention. So we need to put our phones down. We need to be there for our kids. And we need to be a little obnoxious to them and make them respond. That's how they get their friends to respond, right? So let's be present for them and with them. And so this is the information on the lab. I think you got in a printout also with everything. I urge you to use our resources. They're up there. They're kept refreshed all the time. And if there is a question you have that they don't answer, reach out to us, because that's what we're there for, is to help us all navigate the digital and natural environment in which we all live. So thank you for listening, and I will answer whatever questions you have. Come on, Bree, you ask the first one. Ta-da! Now you don't need the mic right next to me. Yeah.
So my question is there a particular age at which you want to start introducing the phone? Because, like you said earlier, every kid wants a phone, and all the other kids already have them.
Right.
So my wife and I made the rule that you have to be 13 to get a phone. So that's what we're playing with.
How are the older the kids now?
So we've got quite a dynamic.
Okay.
Our 17 and 16-year-olds have phones, but our 10 and 12-year-olds do not. And so that's creating a bit of a rift.
Do they try to use the older kids' phones?
Absolutely.
Yeah. And how do the older kids respond to that?
It creates a bit of drama.
I bet. So here's the thing. I mean, also the older kids can learn to use their phones a little more effectively than just staring at them all the time, and so they can hopefully not only learn but actually teach the younger kids and model for them. The modeling isn't just parents to kids, it's also older kids to younger kids. Model for them effective use of it. What's interesting, what I am finding, is that as kids get into their older teens and they've had phones for a while, they start to not like them. I've had kids who've gone in and traded them in for, believe it or not, for flip phones. And one of the things that they need to do, though, is they need to let their peers know when they're offline. Because there's a lot of peer pressure, and a lot of people worry that if they're not responding in 17 seconds, they're being ghosted, right? And so one of the things that, first of all, I strongly recommend is that phones be nowhere near the bedroom at night.
Yeah,
Yeah,
we
maybe charged
take the phones,
elsewhere.
we do take the phones at night.
Yeah,
So
and charge them like in your room or the kitchen or somewhere. And also that screens of any kind be off for an hour before sleep time. I'm not saying bedtime, I'm saying sleep time, when you want them to go to sleep, so that there's time for the melatonin to be released. But to answer your question about the age, there is no magical age. And every 13-year-old, for example, is not the same. There's some 13-year-olds who've been ready to handle social media for 3 years, and there's some 30-year-olds who still aren't, right? And so I think one of the things that is really important is you know your kids better than anybody on the face of the earth, right? And maybe the 10-year-old is ready for a phone and the 12-year-old isn't, right? And so I think it's really more about what the child is doing, how the child is behaving, what they need it for, because sometimes kids don't really need to be able to communicate, and other kids need to communicate all the time because they've got, football practice and drama rehearsal, etc. I don't mean to make it difficult for you, and I know it's way easier to draw a line in the sand and say, on your 13th birthday, you get your phone, right? But nothing magical happens on your 13th birthday, right?
True story. So that's my follow-up question is, because most of us, and myself included, have lost the copper wire phone. So now really those two younger kids are a bit disconnected because their friends can't call our home phone and then ask to speak with them.
Mm-hmm.
So they have to try to get through someone else's phone, or maybe send an email or something like that, and
Mm-hmm.
use their computer.
Yeah.
So do you think that is negatively affecting their connectivity to their friends by not having that interaction?
Well, what do they do instead? I mean, if they're saying, I can't call my friend, so I'm going to go out in the playground and hang out with him or her, that's probably a better thing, right?
Yeah, that's not the case.
But, okay, so if in the old days, the copper wire phone, was the family phone, and they would call it, and it could be answered by mom or dad or sibling or whatever, why can't they call mom or dad on their cell phone and ask to speak to the, just use it the way the old copper wire phones were done. I do want to draw a distinction between connectivity and connectedness, though, because I think that our near infinite connectivity makes it way easier to follow the life of Ashton Kutcher or somebody like that than it is to be with a friend. I think it is hard, and we're seeing a lot of kids who really get stuck in terms of using the phone as a safe way to reach out to people, but then having expectations that they'll have the same closeness, the same connectedness as they would if they were in person. And it just doesn't work that way. And so one of the things that I actually encourage kids to do is when they're thinking of connecting with a friend, always upgrade by one, right? So if you're thinking of tweeting text, if you're thinking of texting call, if you're thinking of calling, do a video call, or better yet, get together in person. And it's like, oh, wow. But here's the final thing that for teenagers, I say you can't make out with a smartphone, right?
That's fair. That's pretty reassuring.
There's a reason to upgrade right there.
Good points, thank you.
Thank you.
Hi, I'm wondering if you could speak to, or if you had any information regarding more of the physical effects, such as eye strain, headaches, EMF exposure.
Yeah, actually, that's a really great question. In fact, one of the things that we found when we were talking to families and kids about during the pandemic, during the lockdown, big spike up in eye pain and strain, and in back and neck problems, in headaches. So yes, there are a whole lot of issues. In fact, there's a fair amount of now research out of China around early exposure to screens and myopia and nearsightedness. because they're not exercising their eyes really to, for distance vision and things of that nature. So there are truly physical aspects to sitting in front of a screen. In terms of, sort of everyday kids and what they come in with, I would say the number one problem physically is sleep deprivation. Not just in terms of total quantity, although that gets crimped, especially when they have a phone in the room with them, because they stay up later texting and staring into that blue light, which means that their sleep latency is extended because they haven't secreted any melatonin. So even when they put the phone down, they're not ready to go to sleep. But one of the really disturbing things that we're seeing is not just that they are falling asleep in school the next day, but they are often not remembering what they learned in school the day before. And the reason for that, we think, is that because they have these phones available, and many of them are waking up to respond to notifications or pings or whatever, that they are not getting the cycle of sleep. We sleep light and deep and light and deep. And it's actually when our fourth stage of deep REM, rapid eye movement sleep, which is where we move what we learned today in class from our short-term memory into our learning centers. And if we're being constantly interrupted, we don't get to stage 4 deep REM sleep. And so it's almost as if these kids have short-term memory problems and they're not retaining stuff because they're not getting to that stage of sleep. I don't mean to depress you.
Hi.
Hi.
So my question is going to sound a little strange, but...
That's okay. I love strange questions.
So just after listening to your explanation of things, my family, a long time ago, we decided to stay off social media. So all of us, parents, children, we don't do social media. My kids don't seem to need it at all. But after looking at your explanation, it seems like you're kind of saying there's a lot of positives to having that interaction, and possibly our world as a whole is, I don't know if it's possible to live without that in order to succeed in the future. What do you think about that? Like, what would you recommend?
Well, there are a couple of things. First of all, it's not social media that is toxic, it's what we do with it, right? That we can use social media. In fact, we found that a lot of what happened on social media when we were in lockdown was that people stayed in touch with distant relatives, friends, etc. In fact, many reignited relationships with people they'd kind of lost touch with because we were all sitting in our houses lonely. So it's not that, I think that it's a mistake to sort of say smartphones bad or TikTok bad or whatever. It's us that controls that. And so, I think that it's perfectly fine to have a choice as a family not to use social media. It's not necessary for life, but it is also something that you can use in ways that can extend your relationships. And one of the things actually with teenagers that I say, it's often an easier place to start a relationship with someone. Back in the days of the copper wire phones we were just talking about, kids would sit in class all day together, never talk to each other, then go home and get on the princess phone and talk for 4 hours, right? Because it felt safer. It felt like you didn't have to have them staring at you and wonder if that, pimple in the middle of your forehead is all they're staring at. And so I think that there is a role for social media in making first steps toward letting someone know you're interested in being their friend, you're interested, and not, the key is not to get stuck there. Not to say, okay, this is as far as it goes and all my friends are online. I have kids that say, I don't have any friends IRL in real life. I have tons of friends online. But I think that we lost a lot when friend became a verb, right? When you could friend someone. But is that a friend that you can cry on their shoulder at 3 in the morning to, right? And frankly, when you could friend people, it became a competition. How many people have you friended? And I actually had a patient that I followed from very young, from about 11, and she went off to college. She had a dear friend in high school who she looked up to because her friend, parents had more money, they had a great life, and all this stuff. She had 967 friends on Facebook and attempted suicide in her dorm room at college because she wasn't telling the whole story. She was only showing all the wonderful things about her life. And so I think that it's how we use these tools that can bring us closer together or can distance us from each other.
Actually, a follow-up on what you just said. I have a son in college right now, and he said it's really hard to make friends these days because everybody is making friends only online. So we're sending these kids that are alone for the first time, in their lives, and they have to control themselves because now we're not there to help them with what we just talked about. And they're finding hard making friends unless they join into the social media event, and now like you said, they're talking on the phone alone in their room, not being outside. Any ideas on how to make that better? Because at this point they're on their own.
I'm actually seeing kids who are changing that back. There's an interesting site you should go to called Half the Story. And this was put together by a young woman who was actually a big influencer on social media around fashion, and made a fair amount of money, went off to Vanderbilt College, good school, and was miserable and sad and alone, even though she had followers all around the world. And so to get out of her funk, I mean, she was clinically depressed, she realized that she was only telling half her story. She was only telling the fancy stuff, the pretty stuff, and not her fears, her loneliness. And I think that she started a whole movement of, let's tell the other half of the story. Let's learn how to be authentic online. Let's how to be our real selves. And if you think about it, the deep and meaningful relationships we have in life are not on the people who are best looking with the people who are best looking. Nobody wants to be Brad Pitt's best friend. Maybe spend a weekend with him, but not his best friend, right? Because it's just too intimidating. But with our close friends, we are close to them because they like us despite and perhaps because of our limitations. Because they can fill those limitations, they can compensate for them, and their limitations can be compensated for by us. We love each other, warts and all, right? And so I think that if we can learn to use social media in ways that are true and authentic and humble and respectful of each other, I think social media can actually be an instrument of peace. I imagine that you could have a kid in Russia and a kid in Ukraine who are on social media with each other, and their respective leaders say, go fight them, they're the enemy, and they say, screw you, I know this kid better than I know you, my ostensible leader. I think that if we can learn to be real on social media, we can actually have a true global village and be together in living a better life. But I'm a pediatrician, so I'm an optimist.
Okay, thank you.
Actually, my question was very similar. We don't do social media as a family, mostly because of our jobs that we need the privacy. But is social media just posting things on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, or is it also texting people like that is kind of the confusing piece for me, right? They say it's social media, and I can access something on Facebook, I can look at something on Instagram without posting my family's amazing vacation to X, Y, or Z.
Right. So you're a lurker.
No. I'm a really skilled Google searcher, is what I am.
No, I'm just teasing you. Yes, I mean, here's the thing. I think all media are now social. If you think about it, like I said, when I talk to kids who play Fortnite, they don't talk about it. I'm getting too close to you, I guess. Yeah, okay. If you think about it, what made Fortnite as big as it was not the game. It was the fact that it was social. And so the lines of what are social media are really blurred. I mean, in the lockdown, tons of people were watching, Tiger King or Queen's Gambit, and they were watching it together on their phones as if they were in the same room, right? So even, quote, watching TV has become social in a way. So I think that sort of to use social media, first of all, is very unclear what that is now. So I think what it is it's really about mindful use of it. Is this tool something that helps what you want to do? In your case, in your jobs, there's certain things you don't want to go out and have out there. And there's certain things that you do. But, it's a great way of staying in touch with grandma, right? And being real, and it makes a huge difference. Big difference. We found, we've done studies comparing different ways of communicating. And actually, after using traditional social media like Instagram, actually their negative affect, their bad feelings go up. But when you get on a video call, and even better, to get face-to-face, the positive feelings are way up. And even though they are riskier in the sense that you're showing more and being more present, but so I think it's really not about the medium itself, it's about what you bring to it and what you expect from it. There's somebody up there. Bree, you're getting an exercise. This is good. And you didn't think you were going to dance tonight.
I think I fall more to, my husband and I fall a little bit into that treat category versus tool. We have 2 young kids, almost 6 and almost 8. And we do let them go on, they're not engaging with people online. If they're watching some YouTube videos, and they switch. And then we have to, okay, it's time to get off, and it's a power struggle. Any recommendations on how to kind of address that or handle that with them?
Well, first of all, to let them know that, it's a privilege to use the switch or to watch a video. It's not an entitlement, right?
Okay.
And that is built into their day. And that if it becomes a struggle today, then maybe it's not a good thing to do tomorrow, right?
So
and mix it up a little bit.
You show us responsibility,
right.
That you can handle this and you can handle getting
right.
off of it.
But it's not about punishment. You're not punishing them. You're helping them manage it,
okay.
right? And that's kids will always feel like they're being punished when it's taken away because they have that sense of entitlement that you owe this to me, right? I get my 30 minutes of video or whatever
yeah,
it
because
is.
we might say, like, let's go outside and, ride a bike or shoot some hoops and let's do this. And then, while making dinner, you can play the Switch. Or...
Right. One of the things that can help them is to have a predetermined schedule of what they're going to do. One of the mistakes we kind of make is sort of have it open-ended and have it be kind of a default behavior. And sort of say, oh, do this until we get it together, whatever that is. Instead of saying, okay, now's your half an hour to go online and do what you do. And instead of having now's the time to stop, have it be now's the time to start something they really like, right? Okay. So it's about starting the next thing, not about stopping this.
Okay. So at 5:30, we're going to prepare dinner. You can play your Switch, and then okay, now let's have dinner.
Right.
So you have to put it away.
And here's the other thing that's kind of cool. Prepare dinner with them.
Okay.
Right? They love to cook, and we fall into this default of it's easier to let them veg out in front of a screen. You can take even really little kids who are not really cooking, but to give them a bowl and a spoon and some flour and they make a huge mess. But they're doing something with you. And kids actually really like to cook. It's fun, it's like a chemistry experiment, right? Put it all together and then they get to eat it too. And I think that the more that you can do things with them, as opposed to say, we're gonna park you here while I do my stuff. I think it's just a different mindset in relationship to it, and I think we get a little lazy because the screens are so easy. It's a great way to pacify them, right? From very early on. And as crude as it sounds, I say, back in the day when parents wanted to pacify a baby, they would give them a sock with sugar and whiskey in it, right?
Yeah.
That pacified him, right?
I think we're struggling with a balance because we interact with I think all parents don't always say this, but we interact with them a lot, and my daughter, she could kind of take it or leave it, but my son, it's from the time he wakes up. When can I have this much time? Can I watch TV? It's all,
Yeah. Well, the
it's
people
very
who,
concerning.
yeah, the people who make these devices and the content for them are very, very smart.
Right.
And I think the only thing you can do is be more interesting than that, right? No, seriously. But it's fun. And it even works with kids who really, I've had kids who've come to us playing 16 hours of video games a day. And how do we get them out of it? We find alternative activities that they get into. Maker spaces are huge. I don't know if you guys have maker spaces around, but maker spaces are essentially a combination of an art studio and a Radio Shack. And there's some incredibly nerdy guy there who can help you build a robot or do whatever. And kids love this stuff. The other thing that actually kids really like is parkour. You know what parkour is? Yeah, it's like gymnastics in a built environment. And they like it because A, it's physical, but B, it's kind of subversive the way video games are. It's kind of like, kind of counterculture and kind of like something that mom wouldn't let you do if she knew you were doing it, sort of thing. And so I think it's just really a matter of realizing what's going on when we're putting them in front of the screens and saying, is this really what I want for my child? And yes, it's more work to cook with them than to have them watch a screen while you cook. But you're making memories, right? And I think that's really important. I do think that we don't make memories when we're in front of a screen.
Thank you.
Sure. Oh, there's somebody. Run, Bree. No.
He's having a difficult time like with games. So I listened to you what you said about give him time, and I play with him, and he does music, and I tried to not take a phone or a computer. I tried it before, but my wife, she told me like not to do it, and I'm still having a difficult time with him.
So your wife doesn't want you taking the phone away?
Yeah, we did it before,
right.
But it came to a point, I said, I cannot, keep punish him, so I need, to give him trust, and help him, to manage his time.
Right.
So I tell him, listen, if you do your homework, and I let you, have a little bit break.
Yeah.
So what he does, he go play games, and then he does his homework till 5 o'clock at night.
And you can't switch the order?
I'm trying.
Yeah. I think one of the hard parts is that we have gotten to a tough place in our society where we want to be our kids' BFF. We want to be our kids' best friend. And we have to remember that we are the parents and that we do know what the outcome of not doing your homework is, the long-term outcome of that. And part of it, part of childhood is learning self-discipline. Raising a child goes from disciplining a child from the outside in to building that discipline from the inside out. And part of that is homework first, games later.
That's what I'm trying to do with him.
Yeah. So you need me to talk to your wife, basically. Is that what you're saying?
That's my wife next time.
Okay. All right. Okay, I think it's okay to draw a line in the sand and say, this is what needs to be done. And that's what I'm saying about the 24-hour day as a glass that you fill up with this much sleep, exercise, school, homework, get things done. It's a finite amount of time. And here's the other piece, When you game first and then you do your homework suffers because you're more tired, you're less focused, and the other problem is when you switch it around and you say homework first and games later, oftentimes they'll rush through their homework and just slapdash it together and get to their, so you need to actually be present and sort of say, show me your homework, You may not understand everything that they were, because the kids' math is way beyond ours now, but just so that they know there's some structure to their lives, because ultimately, they're going to get to college and they're going to have to do this all on their own, right? So our job is to get them to that place, and it's about learning to defer gratification. You know the story of the marshmallow test? The marshmallow test was done, it's a very famous psychological test with like 3-year-olds. And the tester sits down at the table with the kid and puts a marshmallow on the table, on the plate in the table, and says, "Oh, I've been called away for a second. If you don't eat that marshmallow, when I come back, I'll give you 2. And some kids ate the marshmallow, and some kids waited and got 2. And what they found is that those kids who could defer gratification and wait and get the 2 marshmallows did much better in school, did much better socially, etc., because they learned that there are consequences to what they're doing, even in the very short term of 1 versus 2 marshmallows. And in a sense, that's what we're doing here with homework, right? We're saying, if you do your homework now, you will be more productive, happier, more successful in life. It's hard for kids to defer gratification. They have a very short span of, or short vision in terms of what they like. I want to feel good now. They live in the moment. But part of what we're doing as we move from infancy to childhood to adolescence is saying there are consequences to the choices. And I'm going to help you make those choices now because you'll benefit from it later.
But like before, like I used to say, okay, if you do your homework, I let you play games, or you do violin, I let you play games. Now I stopped doing it. I said, listen, you do violin because you like the violin.
Yeah.
And you have to do your homework because it's not a choice, you have to. So I'm not doing the trade with him anymore.
Yeah.
Do you think that's what?
Well, I think, sometimes, as you say, it starts with just doing violin because you have to. And then there comes a point where they say, wow, that's a really nice sound. I really like that. I can make that sound. And so part of it is sort of doing the hard work up front. As they say, it's 98% perspiration and 2% inspiration, that you have to do the hard work to get to a better place. And I think it's hard for kids. And I think that the marketers of these devices and this content are very sophisticated at saying, hey, do this is fun, right? Remember, they have no other goal than taking your money from you. None, right? Remember who bought those games. Remember who's, paying for this, the online access, etc. We have the choice of taking care of our kids and helping them grow up in the environment that we want them to grow up in, right? And if we are sort of saying, okay, well, just do whatever you want, there are going to be adults that just do whatever they want, right? And we haven't served them well. So I think it's hard. It's really hard. And kids know very well that all they have to do is throw a fit and you'll back down. And we can't back down. We've got to love them enough to take care of them.
No, he always tells me, why you hate games? I said,
Do you hate games?
No, I don't, but I don't play games. I never played games.
Yeah.
I always like to be outside and go to the gym.
Well, have him teach you to play the game. Have him teach you.
I wish I had the patience.
Well, there are a lot of things in parenting that require patience, right? This may be one of them. This may be the one for this century. I think that it's hard. It's hard to do. But remember, what you're doing is you are shaping his life. And you are showing him what you love, what you don't love, and let him know you don't hate games. But you might hate him not being the best person he can be, right? And that is what motivates you. And he'll argue with you and say, well, I'm fine. What are you saying? You hate me now, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Right.
That's what he said.
Yeah, exactly. And you know, I mean, it's also about the choices you make and the choices you model for him. And if you show patience and discipline and persevere with him, he will learn those skills too, right? By osmosis, right? You know, by seeing you do it and by just saying, wow, that's cool. Because remember, no matter how much he fights you, he really looks up to you.
Yeah.
He wants to be you. He wants to be as good as you. And he wants to be good enough to please you and be accepted by you.
But you know what you said before about, you know, like create, you know, like cook with your kids. I do all that stuff
Yeah.
with them. I cook, I fight with them, I go to the gym together. I enjoy him with the violin. He's very smart with the violin.
Awesome.
But he has like, he argue a lot.
Get used to it. He's going to be a teenager soon, and he'll be even better at it. It's okay for him to argue. That's him sort of exerting his independence, his autonomy, and we just have to tolerate it. And it's better that he argue with you than that he falls silent and not talk to you at all. Right? So enjoy the argument. Learn debate skills so you get better, and good luck. But I think that, I think parenting is a hard job. It is, and it feels like a thankless job a lot of times, especially when the kid's mad at you. But here's the cool thing that happens. He'll come back in a decade or so and say, thanks. He really will. And I've seen that. I mean, I've had patients that hated me. Absolutely hated me, had an eating disorder, and I insisted that they eat, or they had, issues with substance use, or they had something going on. They hated me, just hated me. And one of the great things that happens from time to time is they come back. I actually have had now 3 former patients who came back and said, I'm going to medical school because I want to be a doctor like you. How cool is that, right? And that's the opportunity you have with your own child, is that you are showing them the way to live a whole, healthy, happy, and successful life.
Dr. Rich, we had a question on this.
Voice from above.
Right over here. So you talked about grandma's rule.
Yeah.
And how don't post something that you won't want grandma to see. Do you have thoughts about what we should do when we find grandma's rule may have been broken, or maybe some other posts that were meaner or worse? How would you respond without falling into the trap of policing and going into that negative space?
Well, first of all, I would sit the kid down with that posting or whatever and say, first of all, if it was mean, how would you feel if this was posted about you? Sometimes kids will take pictures of other kids in embarrassing situations or whatever. How would you feel about that? So, one of the great things about kids is that they are naturally empathetic. And we kind of beat it out of them by teaching them to compete with each other and to, run faster, jump higher, get better grades, whatever. But kids are naturally empathetic, and one of the ways you can do it is say, how would you feel if this were posted about you? Or how would you feel if this were posted about your little sister? Right? So that you try to elicit that feeling of, oh, that's important. And then you can also say, what do you think Grandma would say if she saw this? Should we show this to her? Is this the person you want to be? I mean, one of the things that we have to help them understand is they are building a digital footprint that is going to be there essentially forever, right? I mean, there's so much information out there. Most of it probably gets lost, but the problem is that there's always going to be, look at all the things that are coming out after time now that happened 10, 12 years ago. 10, 12 years ago, they didn't have cameras everywhere. They didn't have, the kind of sensing devices around that are around now. And so we have to be extraordinarily careful to be true to ourselves. And this also goes back to what I was saying about social media, is being our authentic selves. It's okay to be limited, it's okay to be weak, it's okay to cry or be lonely, and share that with people. And actually that elicits way better responses than posturing or putting people down. You know, and I think kids are particularly good at turning on a dime and realizing, oh, that was really stupid, that was really mean. And they are actually very good at apologizing and moving on. Much better than adults are, quite frankly. And so I think that what you want to do is not to crack down on them and punish them so much as to try to elicit empathy and have them see what it would feel like to be on the receiving end of whatever that was. Sure. People want to go home, don't they? Come on, I don't want to keep you here. I'm happy to sort of hang out and answer questions up here if people want to wander down after.
I have one last question from the audience, the fielding from the audience.
And she has 2 mics and can't turn either one of them on.
Hold on. Okay, no, it's not. Okay, I'm just going to speak loudly.
Just yell.
What is the most effective model you have seen used in schools in terms of cell phones and classrooms? And then after this, I promise we're going to do graphic arts.
The most effective model, quite honestly, after many, many have been tried, is not to have cell phones in the classroom. Yeah. Let's remember the task at hand. The task at hand is to, as a group, be exposed to new information, puzzle with it, struggle with it, argue with it, and figure it out for yourself. Phones are nothing but a distraction from that. And early on, people were trying to do sort of, let's use phones, let's incorporate it in the curriculum, etc. The only places that actually it's been incorporated successfully in curriculum is in community service. Is when kids have community service projects and they use it to organize, you know, let's clean up, you know, the highway, or let's, you know, build a playground. But in the classroom, if you're doing math or ELA or science or whatever, it's nothing but a distraction, unfortunately. And what we're seeing is a lot of schools going to, you know, okay, we're not going to do phones anymore. In fact, France does not allow, nationwide does not allow phones in schools at all until grade 9, until high school. And quite frankly, a lot of them are sort of saying, well, maybe we shouldn't have it in high school either. But, you know, their lives get complicated enough and transportation becomes complicated. But I don't say this because I hate phones. I say this because let's focus on what the task at hand is and let's use the best tools for that. Right?